Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this Wednesday, the 20th of January. As always, we encourage you to visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska or www.arh.noaa.gov. Call us on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. And in between shows on Alaska Weather, you can find us on Facebook at NWS Alaska, on Twitter using the hashtag AKwx no matter where you are in the state, and the statewide account is NWS Alaska. Of course, you can find each Weather Service office under their own account. And on YouTube, NWS Alaska. After this show, you can later in the evening find the complete broadcast by searching on YouTube AKwx TV. And again, that is a great way to just kind of scrub along using the slider to find the part of the show that you really want to focus on, whether that's the temperatures or the position of the fronts or the aviation or perhaps marine weather or just a recap at the very, very end. Here's a look at what's going on as far as winter weather advisories and any watches and warnings in the region. Right now, it is just a wind chill advisory, and I say just. However, the wind chill advisory is for temperatures that could feel as cold as 55 below. That's cold. So anywhere west of Kaktovik and through the rest of tonight and into tomorrow before 6 o'clock, we're expecting the winds and the temperature combined to make it feel like it's 55 below. And so that will mainly focus on areas in the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, generally west of Kaktovik there. So a wind chill advisory for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast until 6 o'clock tomorrow for a feels like index more or less of 55 below. Now here's a look at the big picture. What you won't see is a whole lot of activity really close to the coast just yet or really close to the interior. Things are pretty quiet. Most of Alaska today did not see a whole lot of active weather. It is windy and certainly cold up across the North Slope, and for places like Kaktovik and westward, it does feel mighty cold there when the wind is blowing. However, as far as really active or really stormy weather, we don't have that just yet. In the next day or so, the front that you see lifting northward across the Gulf of Alaska is going to squeeze a little more air and kind of channel that through southeast Alaska. And because of that, winds are going to become pretty blustery. We're going to see 40-knot winds blowing along the coast and probably some higher gusts upwards of the 50 to 55-knot range inside and outside of southeastern Alaska. So expect some aviation bumps there, probably some turbulence, and things are going to get pretty choppy there if you're out on the ship. However, as far as really active storms go, we don't have that coming at us on the coast right now. And for most areas, any widespread or heavy precipitation just isn't really a big part of the weather picture for the next couple days. So that's good news. If you're flying, chances are things are going to be at least VFR, maybe flirting with MVFR in some of the passes there. As far as winds go, the wind issue will be a problem for southeast perhaps tomorrow, but things settle out pretty quickly for Friday. And as far as widespread and heavy precipitation, again, that's not really much of a concern. So what do we have? Well, high pressure's sort of in charge of a small area across the central and eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. We've got cold air up north, and of course the wind and the temperature combined is a little bit of an issue for areas west of Kaktovik, but it's not anything you haven't seen before. And as we put the clouds in motion one more time, you can see that track of low pressure here is trying to work its way northward. We're going to watch that front expand and then gradually fall apart again as we head toward the end of the week and early next week. There is another system here across the North Pacific that's gradually lifting northward, but the overall track is to take these systems well south and then kind of curve them around through the Gulf of Alaska and eventually pass them into the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast, where the weather has been tremendously more active than what we've seen here across Alaska in recent weeks. So with all that, here's a look at the surface chart. We have high pressure up north and across the Chukchi Sea at 1,042 millibars there. This is just a little bit of an extension. And again, things are pretty stable. There were some reports of snow and blowing snow up around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. And again, with the air certainly cold and the wind blowing, it makes it feel considerably colder. Here's our current system in the Gulf at 969 millibars, another wave just sticking out to the west of that and producing a little bit of light rain around places like Sand Point. We had a little bit of light rain around Whittier. Again, nothing really amazing to write home about. You can see the clouds are building in across the eastern Gulf. As that lifts northward, the front will gradually expand and kind of stretch out across all of the Gulf Coast as we get into tonight. And that's going to help start squeezing the wind a little bit more across southeastern Alaska. So don't be surprised if you start waking up a little bit in the night and the windows are rattling just a little bit, or the boat's kind of rocking out there if you're sleeping out on the ship. 971 millibar low during the overnight hours. And again, an opportunity for some generally light rain across the west, the north, and the eastern Gulf Coast. A chance for some light mixed precipitation around Prince William Sound, mainly the western Kenai Peninsula and the coastal areas there, Kodiak Island, and parts of Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. Rain and snow mix, showers generally more than anything else. There could be some hit and miss snow showers around the upper Yukon, as well as some of the hills out across the middle Yukon Valley into the Nulato Hills region and the western Alaska Range, but by and large, most places are going to be pretty dry. You'll see more clouds than anything else. Out across the central and western chain, watch for some rain and snow showers, or most of the islands will still be looking at snow showers more than anything else. Probably not mixing just yet around the Pribilofs, also looking at frozen precipitation tonight, and the same will be true as we head into Thursday. Again, low pressure is wrapping up in on itself here. This is a classic occlusion, just kind of slowly mixing everything up here until there's really not a whole lot left. So this frontal boundary will gradually fall apart as we get into Thursday and Friday. Rain and snow showers along the coast at lower elevations, sea level. You're looking at rainfall there. And as you get a little bit further west, you start getting into more of that colder air for the Bering Sea coast. And you'll notice we've got a kind of a flat pattern here with the lines. The black lines, of course, are lines of constant pressure. They are called isobars. And for every line, we kind of gradually move toward low pressure or gradually move toward high pressure. Well, as the distance closes between these two, and you still have the same number of lines, that means there's got to be a lot of air moving through, an equalization of the high pressure to low pressure here. Mother Nature abhors a vacuum. This is the weather trying to fix that problem. And as you get into this pattern, you start to get that east to westerly flow across a large part of the continent. And this is also shaping the ice pattern. We'll take a look at that as we head into the marine weather forecast here in just a little bit. But shore-fast ice and a lot of the ice along that boundary, especially in the northern Bering Sea, really isn't that thick right now. So if that's important to you, if you're going out hunting, perhaps you've got some excursions out onto the ice, or perhaps you're just sending the ship northward toward the ice, you better take a look at the forecast there and the outlook, and you can do that anytime at weather.gov/Alaska. Just click on See Ice Desk there, and you'll get that latest information. Of course, we'll have some of that for you too in a minute. Look across the North Pacific. That front is lifting north toward the central and western chain for Thursday. As we get into Friday, the front in the west is pretty much gone. It is refocusing its efforts well south and moving into the Gulf, and our front across the Gulf of Alaska, gone. We have disturbances rotating around that could create more clouds and more precipitation, but by and large, the characteristics that really get a lot of big weather going are pretty much fizzling out. So kind of like wet fingers on a hot firecracker. No big deal here. As you see, high pressure up across the north and the northern Yukon, 1,021 millibars there. Some pockets of snow showers around the region, especially in the upper Yukon Valley and around the central Yukon Territory itself. And then west of that, the air just dries up. There's just not a whole lot going on. Watch for some light snow around the Pribilofs as we head into Friday, and maybe some stronger winds out across the western chain. The winds across southeast by this point will have eased up. We might have some occasional gusts moving into the Wrangell-St. Elias region and perhaps just north of the Alaska Range. But again, by and large, things don't look that terrible as we head into Friday afternoon. Now here's a look at temperatures this afternoon. For southeast, we saw readings around the capital city all the way down to Ketchikan and Annette in the upper 30s to the upper 40s, about a 10-degree spread from north to south. Yakutat checked in at 40 around 2 o'clock, 43 for Cordova, upper 20s around Whittier and Valdez, 38 around Seward, 30 degrees in Kenai today, 24 in Anchorage, 16 around Squena. It was 27 and even milder in Talkeetna. 1 below in Fairbanks, 1 above for Eagle, and 7 above in Northway, with 2 below in For Yukon, look at temperatures up north around Arctic Village. It was 27 below today, 16 below for Kaktovik, only 4 below in Barrow, but once you get a little bit further in toward the interior and away from the coast, it got as cold as 13 below for Atkasuk. Wainwright saw 11 below. Most of Kotzebue Sound temperatures were at or about 0 degrees. A little bit further inland, temperatures were colder there for Kivalina. 3 below. Shishmaref was 0. 13 above in Nome today. 14 above for Unalakleet. Grayling was 10. McGrath 1 below. Not too bad. It's been a lot colder for you in recent days. 11 above in Bethel. And temps in the Pribilofs were in the lower to mid 30s, with the Alaska Peninsula in the 30s and 40s. Kodiak Island at or just below that 40-degree mark. Southeast in the 30s and 40s tonight. South Central in the teens and 20s. Kodiak 36, 5 below in Fairbanks, and anywhere from 10 to 20 below across the Arctic coast. 30s for most of the south and west parts of Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay region in the lower 20s, with highs tomorrow back in the mid to upper 20s there. 40 in Kodiak. Lower 40s for a large chunk of southeast, some places a little bit cooler up north. The interior back in the single digits. The Arctic coast anywhere from 5 to 15 below. Nome at 15, and South Central in the 20s and 30s. On to aviation weather now. You will see some areas of IFR across the southeastern coast from about Sitka southward all the way down toward Craig and Klawock in the Dixon entrance, around Yakutat, as well as some of the north and western Gulf Coast from just about Whittier southward into parts of the Barren Islands and east. Across the west coast, just flirting with Tin City all the way to Nunivak Island, west of Ammonik, and about to Cape Newenham, and all the way out to the Pribilofs again, where snow should be falling. Central and western parts of the chain also looking at IFR. Most passes will be clear. VFR conditions there for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass tomorrow. Things look pretty good for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, both showing VFR. Rainy Pass also expected to be visual throughout the day. Windy Pass looking at VFR. Isabel Pass visual flight roll. Mentasta Pass may lean over a little bit toward marginal conditions. For your Thursday, Tanita Pass also expected to be marginal conditions there. Portage Pass, MVFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass listed as marginal for your Thursday tomorrow. Freezing levels, we expect 2,000 to 4,000 foot freezing levels there across the Gulf. Remember, this is spreading out and mixing up, so this isn't going to be quite as tight as we look at it tomorrow. And out west, you can see that next disturbance is trying to bring up a little warm air, and it'll probably slosh away and filter out as we get into the next couple days. Icing potential, it's fairly broad and generally light, maybe some isolated moderate across parts of southeast tomorrow and closer to Kodiak Island and the western Kenai Peninsula. Otherwise, hit and miss across the central and western chain and generally west of St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George above 3,000 feet. Here's a jet stream. This is not a jet stream that is going to give us a lot of winter weather. It will keep it cold, but it will keep the really big and interesting storms, or scary storms if that's important to you, south of Alaska. All of this is moving away, and active weather for the most part will just flirt with southeast, and then gradually most of that will probably wash into the west coast. At 9,000 feet, we have stronger winds coming in from the east and northeast, 30 to 40 knots, so the strongest winds are around the coastal areas of the Gulf of Alaska here. And then most of the winds across the interior are pretty light, 10 to about 20 knots there, with low pressure also trying to work its way into the western chain. Once again, a lot of this is going to drop southward, so any really strong winds right now probably not moving into the region over the next couple days. Winds are a little bit stronger around the Alaska Range and southwest here at about 20 to 30 knots. Most of the stronger winds affecting communities will be around the Gulf Coast, and winds are pretty light up north, around 10 knots there, generally from the north and northeast. So here's your turbulence. We'll probably see some stronger gusts here across southeast tomorrow. Again, at the surface, 40 knots sustained with some gusts upwards of 55 knots in the region. So occasional moderate is certainly possible. And above 3,000 feet north of the Alaska Range and into the middle and upper Yukon valleys, probably above 3 to about 4,000 feet and below out west. And then as you get into the central and western chain below 4,000 feet, plan on some chop there. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather and a look at the sea ice edge here in just a few minutes.
Weather balloons here at Fairbanks International Airport are released by the Weather Service twice a day, and the timing of those releases are such that they are coordinated with all the other releases around the world. And that data then which provides a vertical profile of temperature and relative humidity and pressure in the atmosphere, is then integrated into the forecast models run by the Weather Service.
How can you forecast the temperatures when an inversion is present? It is a difficult puzzle. In Fairbanks, often the weather forecast says today, clear skies, high temperatures from 20 below to 10 above, coldest in the valley and mildest in the hills. A 30-degree range. This is not uncommon in the interior winter. It's a difficult puzzle to try to put very precise numbers. We need a broad range because within that shallow layer, you go from such cold temperatures to such warm temperatures. That's just the way it is here in the inhabited elevations of interior Alaska. Well, anything you want to forecast, including a temperature inversion, has to be studied. You have to learn how the inversion works in order to forecast its future behavior. And part of learning how it works involves gathering data. And every day out at the Fairbanks International Airport, a weather balloon is launched. On the end of the balloon is a thermometer, up it goes, and we get the vertical profile of temperature in the atmosphere. And that's real good data. You can see the inversion with that. Problem is, the weather balloon only goes up twice a day. And for forecasting, detecting and forecasting the jet stream, which operates on broad spatial and temporal scales, twice a day is for most purposes adequate. However, down here in this fine spatial scale right in urban Fairbanks, we need more than twice a day to really understand the inversion, especially its formation and its dissipation.
So the weather balloons that are released at Fairbanks International are timed with all those other global releases, and they are not actually at times which are very dynamically active here in Fairbanks, which is another reason that we're interested in doing this experiment with an aircraft and also additional weather balloon releases to sample some of those more dynamically active times of the day.
Basically, in preparing the sondes, you have to take the sonde out of the package, prepare the sensors, and then you'll fill up the weather balloon, then need to calibrate the instrument inside. So that's the most important part of balloon preparation. So when we're calibrating the instrument, we make sure that the temperature of the sensor is realistic with the temperature either of the room or outside, wherever the sonde is being calibrated, as well as pressure, making sure that's at our level, and also the relative humidity, that looks realistic. We use these weather balloons that when they're filled up with helium, they're approximately 6 feet wide. And by the time that they reach the top of the atmosphere where the balloon pops, they're about 20 feet wide. So they're huge. It's hard to even imagine. After we get clearance from the FAA, we'll go outside, take the radio sonde, attach it to the balloon, and then make sure there aren't any planes going by just in case, and let her go. And the computer inside actually picks up the signal automatically. It'll tell you exactly when the balloon was launched, and the data will come processing in from there. After we launch the balloon, I'll go back inside the building and to make sure that the data that's coming in on the computer looks realistic, making sure the pressure decreases with height, the relative humidities look realistic, and in my cases, looking at temperature inversion, that the temperature is increasing with height. Typically in the atmosphere, we see temperature decreasing with height, but in these special cases, that's what I'm looking for. And then I can watch as the temperature progresses vertically into the atmosphere, as that sensor's rising, and I can see where the top of the inversion layer is. So the National Weather Service currently launches weather balloons twice a day, but I wanted to launch weather balloons more frequently than that to see what was happening between those launches. So I wanted to take a look at what's happening between that 4 p.m. launch and that 4 a.m. launch, and then what's happening between the 4 a.m. and the 4 p.m. So I launched these weather balloons every 2 to 3 hours to gain a better temporal resolution of what's going on in the atmosphere.
Our research asked the question, what will surface-based temperature inversions look like in Alaska over the next 100 years? And the primary tool for studying future projections are global climate models. In fact, they're the only tool. But they're not perfect for answering our question because we're interested in information over a city landscape scale, which is a few miles, 5 miles, 10 miles. Global climate models provide information on a 100-mile scale. So we need to get that information from this coarse scale and downscale it to a higher resolution so it's useful for us. And the way we do that is we take climate information from the global climate model and we feed it into our regional model, which has a domain over Alaska at a resolution of, say, a few miles instead of hundreds of miles. And the large-scale climate comes from these global climate models, and then we run our simulation over Alaska. We have done regional downscaling simulations for 20 years in the 20th century, from 1979 to 1999. We've done 10 years from 2010 to 2019, and then from 2050 to 2059, and 2090 to 2099. So with the regional model, we've taken these 4 slices over time, fed by the global climate model. And what we find, first of all, in the 20th century simulation is that the regional model does a much better job of simulating the vertical surface-based temperature inversions over Fairbanks and the other cities in Alaska. And as we go through the 21st century, those 3 other slices, as the global climate warms, we find that the temperature inversions in the lowest layer don't really change in strength. The strength stays the same, but the whole profile gets warmer. So this study provides a first look at what would be happening to temperature inversions in the future. We need to ask other questions like, how will this frequency change? Will they occur as often? Will the season be much shorter? There's a variety of other questions we need to ask to develop a better picture for how temperature inversions will change in the future. And our first cut answer that we have suggests that we'll still have to worry about the same sort of air quality issues because in the near surface, the strength of the inversion will be about the same.
A quick check of sea ice conditions shows that most of the northern parts of the Yukon Delta, including Norton Sound, are looking at high concentrations of ice. But once again, shore-fast ice is not entirely stable right now, and some of that could be pulling away with more of an east to northeasterly flow along the coast and across the northern Bering Sea. And notice that a lot of this ice is spread across the northern Bering, but not quite to St. Matthew. Keep in mind that a lot of the ice still is fairly thin, so plan your excursions and any ventures northward carefully and with the latest information at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php for the outlooks and the current analysis. The marine forecast there shows inside winds looking at 30 to 35 knots from the north in the Lynn Canal, but more from the east and southeast the further south you go toward Petersburg and Ketchikan. And then here's the higher winds across the outer coast. Some of these are looking at gusts that could reach upwards of 55 knots. Sustained, though, only 40 knots from the east and southeast, with seas running around 20 feet or so for Thursday, and then quickly subsiding as we get into Friday. Northerlies still around 15 knots in the Lynn Canal, and northeasterly winds across some of the central regions, including Stevens Passage, southeasterlies in the Dixon Entrance, and southerlies across the outer coast down to 25 to 30 knots or so, running around 16 feet in many areas. For south central, north and easterly winds moving across the north and western Gulf, 15 to as high as 40 knots east of the Barents. Across Cook Inlet, 15 to 30 knots. Those winds pick up as you head southward past Callaghan Island to about 35 knots inside of Shelikof Strait. Also looking at northeasterlies east of Kodiak Island with 18-foot seas there. For Friday, northerlies will take over a little bit more around the Barrens and east of Kodiak Island, about 20 knots with 11 to 12-foot seas. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound and across the northern Gulf, 20 to 25 knots with 12 to 13-foot seas, and northerlies coming down Cook Inlet, about 10 to 20 knots there. Seas ranging from 3 to 5 feet. Across the Alaska Peninsula, 20 knots inside of the Bering Sea, as well as Bristol Bay, looking at 4-foot seas there all the way down the coast. For the Pacific coast, 7 to 15-foot seas with the stronger winds from Castle Cape to Chignik at 35 knots. For Friday, look for winds to subside and start to change direction. Look for more of a southeasterly flow around Sandpoint and King Cove, up to 30 knots there. Lighter winds across the Bering Sea coast, 10 to 15, and northwesterlies all the way up toward Kodiak Island with a 10-foot sea there on the Pacific side. For Thursday in the Aleutians, look for a south and easterly flow for the central and eastern chain. Northwesterlies from Unalaska and into the Pacific coast side, 5 to 6-foot seas there, and northeasterlies a little bit stronger out west from Kiska to Shemya. You're looking at 40 knots with about a 15-foot sea. That diminishes a little bit wind-wise, but the seas come up to 16 feet on Friday, and east and southeasterly winds across the central and eastern chain at 20 knots with seas as low as 5 feet and as high as 13 feet as you get south of Adak and Atka on Friday. Northeasterlies coming off the west coast from 20 to 30 knots on Thursday over the ice around St. Lawrence Island, but 9-foot seas around St. Matthew to the Pribilofs with 5-foot seas and an easterly wind at 15 knots for Thursday, and north and easterly winds continue at about 20 to 30 knots on Friday, with areas of freezing spray possible, especially close to the ice edge, so keep track of that. Northeasterlies outside of the Kuskokwim Bay at 15 knots with a 2-foot sea. The offshore winds will continue there. Across the North Slope, look for gusty winds for areas west of Kaktovik, and a wind chill advisory continues for you through tomorrow until 6 p.m. where values of 55 below. So again, bundle up and take extra care if you're heading out. North and easterly winds down the Chukchi seacoast at 10 to 30 knots, and not much of a change there for Friday. Winds will switch around a little bit more across the eastern and central Beaufort seacoast, 15 to 20 from the east and northeast for Friday. Northeasterly winds outside of Kotzebue Sound at 25 for Friday afternoon. A quick recap of Alaska's weather tonight, tomorrow, and Friday. A front moving north into the Gulf will spread out and push a few more clouds and some stronger winds into southeast for southeast tomorrow, and those quickly diminish as we head into Friday. Another front kind of washes out across the west heading toward the end of the week. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.